The Toyota 4Runner universe is made up of 5 separate but equally important generations. The earlier models represent the smaller and more truck-like end of the spectrum, while the later models are larger and more highway-oriented. This is a 4th generation 4Runner, and when it came out in 2003 to replace the venerated 3rd generation, it represented one of the 4Runner's more dramatic generational shifts. Now, Toyota 4Runner has become a household name over the years as a rugged, truck-based sport utility with exceptional quality and all of the requisite features to make it a nice, everyday family car. The 4Runner is one of the most recognizable and respected models, not just in the SUV world, but in the American automotive landscape as a whole, so while we'll do our best today to consider this 4Runner in a vacuum and weigh it on its own merits, be advised that it's nearly impossible to examine this SUV outside of the shadow cast by the nameplate affixed to its rear hatch. Since the 3rd and 4th generation 4Runners both sold well and have both held up well, they're both still popular on the used car market, and both being fine machines in their own right, they each have their own diehard fans. Frankly, the 3rd gen versus 4th gen debate is a powder keg of angst, controversy, emotion, and deep-seated opinion that's been played out over countless internet forums and lunch tables across this country. In the interest of full disclosure, I must admit that I do have my own allegiances to the 3rd gen 4Runner. However, I came away from my time behind the wheel of this truck with a sense of great respect for it, and in fact, I think that the package that Toyota put together here still held on to that same peerless position in the marketplace that always made a 4Runner a 4Runner. I have to admit that this truck offers a number of substantial benefits over its predecessor with very little in the way of meaningful sacrifice. For the 4th generation, the 4Runner grew to include more passenger space, a smoother ride, a quieter cabin, an optional V8, an optional 3rd row seat, a standard V6 that was not only much more powerful, but also slightly more fuel efficient than the previous model's optional V6, and of course, better cup holders. Couple all of these benefits with the assets that the 4Runner already came to the table with, unmatched quality and respected off-road prowess, and what you've got is a truck-based SUV that was nearly as good at being a car as the best of its car-based competitors, and arguably better than any of its rear-wheel drive-based competitors at being a car or at being a truck. Granted, while some will argue that the fatter exterior dimensions, loss of rear e-locker, and blander, softer exterior styling of the 4th generation cause it to lose some of its luster in the eyes of enthusiasts, the fact is that the 4Runner was moving to meet the rapidly evolving SUV market of the early 2000s, and it was doing a commendable job. With its loss of the base 4-cylinder engine, marginally larger size, and higher, though to be fair only slightly so, V6 base price, the changes brought with this generation of 4Runner were undoubtedly intended to raise Toyota's profit per unit sold, and in turn, fewer average units were sold per year in comparison to the 3rd gen. Indeed, standing outside the 4Runner, it's clear that this truck grew in size moderately from the model it replaced. Since bigger usually is better, this is fine until you ask one simple question. Why? Well, perhaps Toyota wanted to make the 4Runner a better passenger hauler. Okay, fine, but Toyota already had a midsize SUV designed as a passenger hauler from the ground up, the Highlander. Well, perhaps customers wanted a body-on-frame SUV that excelled at soccer mom duty. Okay, sure, but Toyota already had the Sequoia readily available for this purpose. Well, maybe Toyota thought that the off-road SUV market was simply craving something bigger. Okay, fine, but isn't that exactly what the Land Cruiser always was? I understand that Toyota was making the 4Runner larger and more car-like because that's where the aggregate SUV market was shifting to at the time, but in doing so, they stepped on their own toes somewhat by causing the new 4Runner to overlap more than it ever had with existing models in Toyota's relatively expansive lineup of SUVs. Granted, this 4Runner stands up on its own merit, and in a vacuum, its relatively larger size doesn't necessarily present a problem, but it does leave you to wonder what could have been if Toyota had left the 4Runner smaller and more truck-like in order to serve a somewhat different market. Standing before us, this 2005 Limited wears a monochromatic black paint scheme with 17-inch aluminum alloys and an optional rear spoiler. This spoiler was introduced for 2005, and it looks a little bulbous, but it is good for airflow. 2005 marked the final year before the 4Runner received a facelift and got chunkier, tougher-looking front and rear bumpers along with redesigned and upgraded headlights and taillights. My personal preference does favor the look of the later models. The overall outline of the 4Runner is that of a standard 2-box SUV. The body shape is pretty square overall, but the creases in the sheet metal are rather soft and anonymous. In classic 4Runner style, the C-pillar is swept back diagonally and the rear windshield rolls down electronically. The headlights now had plastic lenses and got a more windswept look than before. Ground clearance was down from the previous generation, but still better than any of its peers, including, for instance, the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Nearly all 4th Gen 4Runners came with the body color plastic lower body molding that you see here, which is relatively tasteful and durable. The one exception is the early 2003 SR5 and Sport models, which came with unpainted gray plastic molding instead. Toyota axed this unpainted molding fairly quickly after the 4th Gen was released, upon finding that it was one of the biggest complaints that customers had about the car. Hop into the driver's seat of the 4Runner and you immediately notice and appreciate its newfound width. You're flanked on one side by a thick door panel featuring sturdy armrests, and on the other side by a big, thick, wide, all-American flag-waving center console. Folks, compared to the old 4Runners, this here center console with its supersized cup holders and multi-acre armrest pledges allegiance to the flag, loves baseball and apple pie, and stretches from sea to shining sea. The dashboard, door panels, and center console take up their fair share of volume and wrap around the driver in an ergonomically correct fashion. This cabin feels roomy where it counts, if not open and cavernous. The seating position is a little more upright than before thanks to the slightly higher roof and slightly lower floor, although this still isn't a particularly tall cabin, and taller drivers may find that they fit better in here without the optional sunroof. In typical Toyota fashion, the front seats are well designed for proper support, and the leather feels to be of good quality. The driver's seat in this Limited is 8-way power, the passenger seat is 4-way power, and they're heated. The rear seating area is pleasant, with lots of space and big windows to see out of. The seat itself is well shaped and built, and placed high for good support. While this 4Runner doesn't have the third row, these two small optional seats sat on top of the rear cargo floor and folded up and to the side when not in use, similar to in a Land Cruiser. These seats would have really only been suitable for kids or perhaps adults for very short distances. The second row seat folds flat with ease and the tailgate opens wide to produce a big, cavernous cargo area with lots of usable space. Even with the rear seats up, space back here is pretty generous. Assembly quality of this interior is classic Toyota. Very tight and consistent with excellent fit and finish and better than average materials. One exception is the upper dashboard material, which, despite being soft touch and feeling to be of high quality, has large cracks in it after 14 years on the road. Indeed, early dash cracking was a common and well-known issue in 4th Gen 4Runners, and in an impressive move of good faith not usually seen outside of safety-related recalls, in what they called a warranty enhancement program, Toyota offered to completely replace any cracking 4th Gen 4Runner upper dashboard entirely for free, whether or not you were the original owner, long after the original warranty expired. Unfortunately, however, this dashboard replacement program ended in May 2017, so if your 4th Gen is currently experiencing this problem, you'll either have to pay out of pocket or just live with it. Although I appreciate the generally high quality of this interior, I'm gonna have to break with Toyota for this one on grounds of styling. Gone is the restrained, conservative interior design of the 3rd Gen 4Runner in favor of a louder, sportier design language. Some of the styling elements in here are tacky, loud, or cheesy in my estimation, and I don't think they've aged particularly well. The gauge cluster, for instance, is flamboyant, plasticky, and bigger than it needs to be. Things you never would have been able to say about any component of the old 4Runner's interior. The heating and air controls are a trio of knob-shaped buttons that are cheesy, busy, overly complicated, and seem to attempt to imitate the controls of a Nintendo Game Boy. Finally, there's the faux granite plastic interior trim, which looks like Formica countertop ripped out of a 1997 kitchen remodel. Consider me a decided fan of the old 4Runner's timeless, classic, if perhaps a little bit boring, cockpit design. If you find yourself in agreement, allow me to suggest the Lexus Gx 470. Introduced in 2003 and based on the 4th Gen, the GX 470 was Lexus's first 4Runner-based SUV, and it featured the same tasteful styling both inside and out that Toyotas were prized for in the 90s. This limited 4x4 V6 4Runner came with most of the features offered for 2005, with one big exception, the V8. We'll discuss engines in more detail momentarily, but it's worth mentioning that Toyota didn't really hold any other options hostage for the bigger engine with this 4Runner. That is to say, you could get the top trim level, limited without springing for the V8, and that limited trim was essentially the price of admission for virtually all of the other standalone options that one could choose, with one exception. The self-leveling rear air suspension was only available with the V8. Considering that such setups are typically prone to more and more expensive problems as they age, and considering the fact that the 4Runner's conventional suspension leaves little to be desired, I don't estimate that we're really missing out on much. That V8 joined several other big-ticket items on a list of options that Toyota offered on any 2005 4Runner regardless of trim level. Those would be four-wheel drive, third-row seating, the sunroof, and the JBL sound system. So the 4th Gen 4Runner was really a pretty user-configurable package all in all. What the Limited did have that were locked out of the two lower trims, SR5 and Sport, were several luxury interior touches, like leather upholstery, heated power front seats, and dual-zone climate control. Standard on even the base model SR5 were power windows, locks and mirrors, keyless entry, power roll-down rear windshield, automatic climate control, AM/FM CD cassette, and alloy wheels. One more tidbit you may find useful. A tilt telescoping steering wheel was standard on Sport and Limited 4Runners, while the SR5 was tilt only. Indeed, V8 notwithstanding, today's specimen is nearly fully loaded. The question is, just how badly are we missing out for lack of that V8? Well, after spending some time with this V6, my conclusion was probably not much. Allow me to introduce the 4.0-liter 1GR FE. The GR family of Toyota V6s was brand new for 2003 with the introduction of this generation 4Runner. Made of aluminum from its block all the way up to its lower intake manifold with 4 valves per cylinder, dual overhead cams, and variable valve timing, this engine was a masterpiece in its day, and it's really stood the test of time, offering both great driving characteristics and unmatched durability. The power band is thick and juicy. The strong low-end pull continues as the engine revs happily up to higher RPMs. Acceleration is buttery smooth and strikingly refined, surprisingly so for a truck. I love this engine. It's classic Toyota. It's got plenty of power, but its refinement and reliability record are really what separate it from any other high-displacement truck V6 that you might compare it to. With 245 horsepower and 282 pound-feet of torque from this 4-liter, it's almost a mystery why Toyota would even bother offering a V8 option for this 4Runner. But the iron block 4.7-liter 2UZ FE and its extra 48 pound-feet of torque did have a purpose, and that was to raise the 4Runner's maximum towing capacity from 5,000 pounds to 7,300 pounds. With its increased weight, increased cost, decreased fuel economy, and decreased engine bay space, I think that most drivers would frankly be better off skipping the V8, unless being able to tow more than 5,000 pounds is an absolute requirement, or you're simply a V8 person. Interestingly enough, for the first 2 model years of the 4th Gen, the V8, which didn't join the V6 in offering variable valve timing until 2005, actually ran at a deficit of 10 horsepower compared to the V6. One last score for the V6, it features a timing chain versus the V8's belt, so that's one less maintenance item to worry about. This engine pushes a 5-speed automatic that was new to the V6 for the 2005 model year. This transmission is a sealed unit with lifetime fluid and no dipstick that had already been running in V8 4Runners since 2003. While I'm personally unnerved by the concept of transmission fluid that I can't check level of or change easily, durability of these units is reportedly good. No manual transmission option was available for the 4th Gen. Attached to the backside of this transmission is the heart of the 4Runner's off-road resume, a 2-speed electronically engaged transfer case featuring a Torsen limited slip center differential with locking capability, which was quite advanced at the time and made up somewhat, though not entirely, for the loss of the 3rd Gen's electronically locking rear differential option. V6 4Runners could operate normally in 2-wheel drive or shift on the fly into 4-high, where the standard static torque split was 40% to the front wheels and 60% to the rear, with maximums of 70% to the rear and 53% to the front. V8 models traded the V6's 2-wheel drive mode for full-time 4-wheel drive, with 4-high and 4-low being the only 2 modes of operation. Finally, at the rear of the 4Runner, we find a coil-sprung solid rear axle. Toyota's choice not to fit the 4Runner with an independent rear suspension setup serves to further its towing and off-roading credentials. In two-wheel drive 4Runners, this axle housed a mechanical limited slip rear differential. However, in the case of a four-wheel drive truck like this one, the rear differential is open, with a system called A-Track standing in as an electronic substitute for limited slip. A-Track is Toyota's name for a system that applies brake pressure to a wheel that's losing traction in order to send torque to the wheel that does have traction. And while it's no substitute for a locking rear differential, many 4th Gen owners report that A-Track is just as good or better than a mechanical limited slip differential in their experience. Rounding out this chassis' abilities, both on and off-road, are several more electronic goodies. Stability control was standard on all 4th Gen 4Runners, and it's worth noting that for the last two model years, 2008 and 2009, Toyota added the capability to turn off VSC if desired. Also standard was Hill Start Assist, or HAC, which was intended to minimize backwards rolling on steep uphill ascents. Standard on four-wheel drive models only was Downhill Assist Control, or DAC, which was intended to maximize speed control on steep downhill ascents and is activated through a button on the dashboard. Of course, the 4Runner featured body-on-frame construction as always, and this frame is fully boxed with double wishbones and coilover shocks up front, and 4 links locating the axle at the rear. Stabilizer bars are provided both front and rear. This frame, new for 2003, is shared with an overseas model called the Land Cruiser Prado, so while the 4Runner and Tacoma share front suspension components, they aren't on exactly the same frame. One interesting feature of the 4th Gen suspension that was standard on the Sport model and available on the Limited was something that Toyota called X-Ray-S. X-Ray-S, if that is how you're supposed to say it, was designed by Yamaha, and basically what it does is to hydraulically couple the nitrogen charge in each of the 4 shock absorbers with that of the shock absorber that it is diagonally opposed to. This system is intended to enhance the suspension's on-road performance by dampening sway and pitch motions. The overall goal is to keep all 4 of the 4Runner's wheels as flat on the pavement as possible. As neat as the X-Ray-S system sounds in theory, many 4th Gen enthusiasts do consider it to be a reliability nuisance they'd be better off without. Skid plates are provided for the engine, fuel tank, and transfer case. Aftermarket support for the 4th Gen is healthy. Going down the road in this 4Runner, you notice the sense of substance and gravity inherent to its body-on-frame construction, and yet, this truckish frame is so modern and well-designed that it still manages to offer a commendably smooth and well-controlled ride. Driving around town in the 4Runner, it feels like this SUV manages to combine many of the best attributes of a truck and a car with very little compromise, and I have to say, I was impressed by the overall comfort level of this driving experience. The 4Runner's size itself is also something that strikes a good balance. There's plenty of room in here to keep adults comfortable for extended periods of time, and yet it avoids the drawback that bigger SUVs come with of being a complete chore to maneuver around in parking lots or intersections. Visibility is good too, with big windows, big mirrors, and a commanding seating position. This SUV is by no means nimble, but the steering is well weighted, with an impressively tight turning circle, and this rather big 4-spoke steering wheel with its leather wrap and concise selection of radio control buttons feels like a quality piece. Brakes are an upgrade from the 3rd Gen with standard 4-wheel discs, but the 5th Gen's brakes are much better yet. I found their performance to be unnoteworthy. Most everything about this driving experience is strikingly refined. The acceleration, the shifting, and the ride are all outstandingly smooth for this class of car. Over rough pavement, the 4Runner feels very well composed and the interior is tight and rattle-free. Largely gone are the stiff ride, narrow cabin, and overall noise level of the 3rd Gen 4Runner. And while this is objectively a good thing, you do lose out on that sense of raw connection between man and machine that forged such a deep connection in the hearts of fans of the earlier model. Now, in the event that you were to take this 4Runner off-road, which I understand that many or most drivers probably won't, you would find that in spite of its advanced 4-wheel drive system and numerous electronic aids, in stock form, this 4Runner is no match for its predecessor, with its tidier exterior dimensions, shorter wheelbase, increased ground clearance and suspension travel, and optional rear e-locker. This 4Runner can tackle slippery conditions and mild trails fine, but if you prioritize serious off-roading ability, the 3rd Gen is your machine. This is probably the strongest, maybe the only, objective argument in favor of the third gen, and admittedly, there's a good chance it doesn't even matter to you. But the earlier model's smaller size and unapologetically truckish driving experience make it feel genuine, authentic, like a car that wasn't chasing dollar signs as transparently as this one, and that's what endears it to enthusiasts. This 4Runner, to be absolutely fair, gives up little to nothing in the way of utility while becoming a better passenger car than its predecessor. So, while there was a shift within the domain of the 4Runner away from the ruggedness and towards the comfort end of the spectrum with the introduction of this model, I still think that the 4Runner's unique balance of utility, refinement, features, and durability maintained its exclusivity within the market. Ultimately, unless off-roading is your top priority or you simply fall in love with the look and feel of the old third gen, I'm not sure you'll find a better used midsize SUV than this one. The 4th generation 4Runner strikes an excellent compromise, but my fellow car enthusiasts will understand. It's just that the sensation of compromise, even worthwhile compromise, sometimes finds itself at odds with passion.